You're either with us or you're with the terrorists, George W. Bush famously said after 9/11 at the UN. Well, our government has publicly, along with NATO and others, armed al-Qaeda, renaming it ISIL, ISIS. It has new names every few weeks, and is turning them loose across the planet. Former Congressman Ron Paul is going to be joining us tomorrow for 30 minutes with his take on that, his son running for president, and a lot more. And former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura will also be joining us tomorrow. They're both on the second and third hours. We're now in to the second hour today. I am your host, Alex Jones. Now, one of my favorite guests is Dr. Russell Blaylock. And, of course, he's a retired brain surgeon, a well-known famous brain surgeon who developed some of the most widely used techniques out there today. And he has basically in the last 30 years introduced many of the terms that are now in mainline medical journals, like excitotoxins and issues like that. And he has been vindicated on the dangers of aspartame, mercury in the vaccines, thimerosal. He has been vindicated over and over again. In the last month, we've seen not one but two high-level FDA whistleblowers come out. One of them was one of the scientists that was one of the two main authors of a big study that came out 6 years ago. And then another one that came out in 2004. Now, the one in 2004 was the one that said mercury is actually good for your children's brains. And I'm going to play that clip from CBS News from 2004. And he said that they were basically ordered to omit the evidence showing a tripling in autism in boys. So how did Monsanto, with the Searle research, say that monkeys, that were fed in their milk, aspartame was fine? They just omitted all the dead or brain-damaged monkeys and then only kept the ones that were okay and said, oh, look, it's fine. Doesn't matter if 73% of the monkeys died or became brain-damaged. They just omitted them from the study. That's been in Congress. So, and where I learned about that? From Dr. Blaylock, got to be 15 years ago on the show. Of all the guests, he has been the most trailblazing. I know he hasn't come on, to have his, butt kissed, but I mean, we need to recognize people that have been demonized on national television, the Associated Press, you name it. When he said the H1N1 was a fraud, it would lower your immune system. A year later, the head of the EU Commission, Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg, came out and confirmed it all. He has been triple vindicated in everything he said. And so I want to just cover the waterfront from the articles he wrote on his BlaylockWellnessCenter.com, the articles he wrote from Newsmax.com, everything. I mean, it's just so accurate, his research, that literally he's a national treasure. And I don't gush like that with most of our guests. It's just that I've been on the air 20 years. I've been interviewing this guy since 1998 or so. So I guess about 16 years. And we wouldn't be where we are having most Americans now aware of what's going on, vaccine levels going way down, people realizing they're dangerous. We're not against vaccines. It's just that it's what's in them, and then they've got liability protection. We got to clean up their act. And at least that's my view. He has a new super awesome website and a podcast, BlaylockHealthChannel.com, BlaylockHealthChannel.com. What a resource. Send that out to everybody. We're going to tweet it at Real Alex Jones. We're going to post it to Facebook. Get that out to everybody, because every child we warn, every parent we warn, they won't listen to somebody like me half the time, or they won't even listen to Ron Paul, or they won't listen, or they can fire Hollywood stars that come out and criticize vaccines to try to shut everybody up, but they'll listen to a medical doctor, a brain surgeon like Dr. Russell Blaylock. So he's with us for the balance of the hour, and then we're going to have open phones in the third hour today, but we're going to cover it all: Obamacare, the vaccines, this new mystery virus that even CBS and NBC admit is linked to the vaccines. 4 articles the last 2 weeks. In 3 continents, people getting paralyzed or dying from UN vaccine programs, MMR, polio, and Gardasil. It's just crazy what's happening. Dr. Blaylock, thank you so much for coming on with us.
Well, thank you, Alex.
Where do you want to start?
Well, we can start with this enterovirus D68. What most people don't know, and a lot of physicians don't know, is that the enteroviruses, which is a group of viruses that normally inhabit the intestines, most of them are pretty benign. They just cause a mild fever, a little ache, and a few days later you're well. When I was growing up, in fact, we called it a summer virus. So these are very common viruses. Now, what changed to produce the epidemic of polio back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s was not a change in the virus. It was a change in the host, that is, people's immune system. And analysis of it now by independent scientists, not these politically controlled scientists, but independent scientists, shows that something happened to people's immunity. And about the time that polio started paralyzing so many children, they were doing widespread inoculations for diphtheria and pertussis. And there's evidence now that alters the immune system so that it produces a different disease, and that is paralysis. And, if the virus itself caused paralysis, then everybody that got infected with the polio enterovirus would have been paralyzed. Well, they weren't. The vast majority of people who contracted the polio virus had no disease or very mild disease. Only a small percentage were ever developing any form of paralysis.
By the way, my grandmother, who's 89, just beautiful, wonderful, smart person, she was given the first polio vaccine, and then a month later got polio, and it ate half the muscle in her body. But sorry, just go ahead.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that was the big scandal at the time, was that the vaccine itself eventually was causing virtually all the reported cases of polio, not a wild-type virus. And one of the big puzzles was that the virus seemed to be affecting the wealthier people, the upper economic class, than poor neighborhoods. Normally we'd see just the opposite. And what they discovered was that poor kids get a lot of normal infections, and so they have good, strong immune systems. Whereas the wealthier kids were being protected against these diseases by avoiding the infections and getting the vaccines, and therefore their immune system was very poor and couldn't react to it. And this is we're seeing this magnified many times over now, where there's just an unending push to vaccinate for every known disease, even childhood diseases that are quite mild. When I grew up, everybody got measles, mumps, chicken pox. All of these things were very common. And that built our immune systems up so that as we became adults, we're more resistant to things like flu. And so, I've never had a flu shot in my life. I've never had a serious case of flu. But we've weakened everybody's immune system so severely now from all of these things, poor diet, things that we know suppress immunity, like the vaccines, the way they're given, that now people can't react. And what people don't know about vaccines, and most doctors don't know, but it's well demonstrated in medical literature, is that the vaccines shift your immune system to an immune suppression type state called a Th2 shift.
And you said that during the H1N1 scare, and then 6 months later, the Canadian government came out with 2 studies and said that it cut your immune system by as much or more than 50% to take that vaccine. So how did you know that at the time? I guess just because it had already been done before. I mean, you already knew. Well,
the research had shown that that's what most vaccines do, is they shift your immune system to a weaker antiviral type immune system. Well, we know, for instance, if we switch over to the Ebola incident in Africa, well, what they don't tell the general public is that Africans almost all have parasitic infections, malaria, roundworms in their intestines, and that it has been shown by multiple studies, and several recent have come out in the Nature magazine and Science, that this powerfully suppresses their cellular immunity, their ability to fight viruses. The Ebola virus itself invades the white blood cells that fight viruses and weakens the immune system further. So they're at a particularly vulnerable state. It's not that the virus is such a vicious killer. It's that the people that it's infecting have this immune suppression. Well, if you're taking the United States and injecting people with so many vaccines that you're keeping them in a constant state, just like the Africans, that now you're switching everybody to this Th2 immune suppression, then everybody in the United States becomes more susceptible as well. And no one's talking about that. Now, a lot of scientists know that, but they're afraid to speak out because their careers will be ruined.
Well, that's what I was about to throw out. Look at how they get comedians fired from State Farm commercials just because in their private life they say, man, something's going on with these vaccines or America's becoming fascist. But you know this in the literature. Other medical doctors know it. My dad's an oral surgeon and a chemist, but he told me this stuff when I was a kid. So it's obviously not a secret with people that are learned, but then I've got family that are other medical doctors that write articles for the newspaper, promoting vaccines, saying, safe and effective, no problems. Don't listen to people that say, it's the law when it isn't the law. Because I'm a good doctor and I'm Harvard educated, and you don't tell me I'm wrong, and that's a bunch of quackery. But then I go read all the mainline studies, the inserts. You are really covering what's mainline science. How can there be a disconnect between a Harvard educated pediatrician and then a brain surgeon like yourself when all you're doing is covering the body of the most scientific, respected literature?
Well, the problem is most physicians don't read scientific literature. They read clinical studies, and they read it in only a handful of journals. For instance, pediatricians read their journal and a couple of other journals, but that's it. So most of their information they're getting from the vaccine manufacturers. They're getting from their pediatric, what I call a trade union. And so they're not getting scientific information. They're getting propaganda.
Sure. I mean, in the journal, you got a Gardasil ad, you got 2 or 3 other ads, and then right next to it, an article about how great Gardasil is. I mean, this is not rocket science.
Well, and the thing is, you see, what I do is I spend a lot of time delving deep into mechanisms by which all this occurs. And I just finished a couple of weeks ago lecturing to a group of pediatricians, teaching them this mechanism. And in the audience were a number of scientists who do excellent science, and they agreed. They said that, the mechanism you're describing is right on target. Well, when you hear these doctors who get up and say it's completely safe and there's no mechanism by which it could cause it, they don't know what they're talking about, because there is a very firm, well-demonstrated scientific method by which these vaccines are causing brain damage, prolonged brain inflammation, and excitotoxicity in the brain that goes on for decades, possibly a lifetime, that has the potential of increasing a number of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS. And what shocked me is I cannot believe since my career, and it goes back a good ways, I have never seen so much neurological disease in people. We're just seeing an explosion of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ALS. When I was a resident, we had to look around hard to find a case of ALS. Now they're everywhere. Everybody knows somebody that has a friend or a relative that has ALS. It's just unbelievable. And yet the medical profession, I'm talking about the clinical practicing doctor, he's totally clueless as to the mechanism by which you can produce this. Yet in experimental animals, we can produce all of these neurological diseases by stimulating the immune system in ways that resemble vaccination, particularly the sequential excessive vaccination will produce this progressive neurodegeneration, just like we're seeing clinically.
Well, I worked for a large animal vet off and on for 3 years, and this was 25 years ago. And back then, one day a week at his clinic, he would take dogs and cats out in the country, and people would come in, and he'd say, you don't need a shot every year. They need them every 3 years max. some of these vaccines work 10 years on a dog or a cat. And they'd say, but I'm supposed to get it every year. And he'd say, no, you don't need that. And then he would explain to me, we see him have convulsions. We see him have autoimmune disorders. We see their allergies, especially in purebreds. And then now, of course, in the last decade, vets lobbied to get it to every 3 years. Now the vaccine companies are pushing back through the veterinary associations to make it at the state level, mandated every year, literally just to make money. But the vets knew this, Dr. Blaylock, 25 years ago.
Yeah, I hear from a lot of veterinary experts who tell me that they're seeing a terrible deterioration of the dogs and the cats from these vaccinations. Because just like humans, every time they can think of a new vaccine, they give it to them. And they're seeing this terrible deterioration, and it's the same sort of disorders we're seeing in humans. We're seeing brain degeneration. We're seeing an explosion of autoimmune diseases in the animals. Well, that's exactly what we're seeing in humans. We're seeing an explosion of autoimmune diseases of every kind. They're occurring at early ages. We're seeing increased MS, lupus, all of these autoimmune disorders. We have good explanations as to how the vaccine would do that. We have demonstration in our scientific studies of producing these very same diseases by vaccination. And yet the intimidation by the pharmaceutical companies and the government in link with pharmaceutical companies, scientists are terrified to speak out. And what they did to Andrew Wakefield is one of the reasons that doctors are so terrified to open their mouth and say, hey, look, millions of people are having their lives destroyed and their health destroyed by this crazy vaccine policy. I mean, we're not even reasonable now. They're wanting to give 150 vaccines over a lifetime. Well, you can't do that to an animal and not destroy the animal's health. And you can't do it to a child or a human being. A child gets about almost 40 different vaccines by the time they start school. Well, now, after they're in school, they want them to get even more vaccines. And when they go to college, they want more vaccines. If they go into the medical profession, they say you can't enter a hospital unless you get a flu shot every year.
Isn't this the heart of tyranny? Because if you talk to the brain surgeons, the medical doctors, the vets, they'll all tell you the same thing. The inserts on a lot of the vaccines admit it doesn't even protect you. More studies out that hepatitis vaccines attack the liver. Why are we giving newborn babies? Getting to the heart of this, Dr. Blaylock, they've had decades now to know this is going on. Instead, they're ramping it up. Until 6 years ago, no medical doctor I talked to would ever vaccinate a pregnant woman. So they doubled down and said pregnant women need extra. So instead of admitting that they've been caught in this eugenics policy is what I believe it really is, and you've documented that as well, instead they seem to be doubling down. What's at the bottom of this rabbit hole? What is the vaccine agenda really about?
Well, before I answer that, I think without question the vaccinating of pregnant women, which they say they should be vaccinated during any stage of their pregnancy, is the most absolute, insane, anti-scientific, unsupportable idea anyone could have come up with. Now, we have overwhelming evidence that immune stimulation during pregnancy increases the risk of that child being born with later developing autism or schizophrenia about sixfold to sevenfold higher. Now, we know that. We know miscarriages are increased. Yet they're carrying out this insane policy of telling every woman to get a vaccine. Now, the reason they're doing that is because they can't even interpret the scientific studies, which found that if women develop the flu or develop an infection, a serious infection during pregnancy, it increases the risk of autism and schizophrenia in the baby. But the studies found it's not the virus, it's the immune reaction that causes it. It's interleukin 6, and that you can produce it without a virus just by stimulating the immune system. Well, a woman's risk of getting a serious infection during her pregnancy is pretty small, but they're calling for stimulating the immune system of every pregnant woman in the United States.
Unbelievable.
How insane is that?
Well, because it's on.
I believe that the doctors that know this, the scientists that know this, will just sit by and let them destroy the lives of millions of unborn babies, and knowing that the science strongly supports that this is the most insane idea anyone could ever come up with. For number one, the flu vaccine during pregnancy, the flu vaccine is ineffective for most people, and particularly during pregnancy, the vaccine is going to be a lot less effective. So, but it will stimulate those cytokines that produce this abnormal development of the brain that produces autism and schizophrenia. So how many schizophrenics and autistic children are we going to have another 5 years from now after they've started this insane policy?
Unbelievable. The neurological disorders, the mental illness, every metric is going parabolic, straight up like a rocket. And when we come back, we'll get your answer, because you just set that up with, is it on purpose? Well, at this point, we know it is, because they know. I mean, every doctor I've talked to goes, yes, it's true. We know you don't vaccinate pregnant women. Everybody knew that. So why do they say in articles I have, women need extra? I mean, just give a pregnant woman extra. They just need it. It's a doubling down. It's an over-the-top evil. It's a full commitment. And it is just devilish. Dr. Blaylock is our guest. I'm Alex Jones. The globalist social engineers are not just targeting us with propaganda. They are manipulating our genetics. We are being targeted at every level by estrogen mimickers that lower our testosterone and other hormones and natural compounds that the body needs. After consulting top doctors, nutritionists, pharmacists, and others, we have developed what I believe is the ultimate non-GMO organic super male vitality formula, sourced from powerful organic herbs and then concentrated for maximum potency. Super Male Vitality was developed to activate your body's own natural processes instead of using synthetic chemicals. Super Male Vitality by InfoWars Life is so powerful that I only take half the recommended dose. For a limited time, we are offering 15% off Super Male Vitality at InfoWarsLife.com to introduce you to this powerful supplement. Visit InfoWarsLife.com today to secure your Super Male Vitality. InfoWarsLife.com. We're going to go back to Dr. Blaylock here in a moment and get into Obamacare and other big medical issues that are out there. BlaylockWellnessCenter.com, Newsmax.com, BlaylockHealthChannel.com is where you find his podcast. It's an excellent website. And you should be on a mission to send this to school nurses, a mission to send this to other talk show hosts, a mission to take the YouTube that'll be up by tonight or tomorrow of this live radio/TV show, and you should send it out to people. Vaccinating pregnant women is a death sentence in many cases. Imagine if we were reporting the Nazis would shoot up pregnant women to try to force an abortion. The UN's been caught adding a hormone synthetically to the tetanus shot to then cause abortions. You can look that up. That's mainstream news. They've been caught in the mid-90s and again last year doing it. So this is going on. Remember the Tuskegee syphilis stuff? Remember all the other tests on troops? It's still going on. Why do we trust the people, these eugenicists that run the system? I'm going to get Dr. Blaylock to get into that and his research and why he thinks this is going on. And because if we ever admit this is really going on, the whole system will come down. That's why so many people in the system just rationalize, because they've been part of it. They don't want to admit that through ignorance, they have aided and abetted this scientific dictatorship. That's my view. We'll get Dr. Blaylock's view in a moment. Dr. Blaylock, I want to play a clip here and get your response to this, because I don't like to mention this without playing it because it's so outrageous. Here's the local version of a national CBS story from 2004. We now have one of the main authors of the study admitting they were told to omit the evidence that it was actually tripling autism in boys. What a difference 10 years makes. Here they are 10 years later admitting it was all a lie. Here's the original report. Mercury is good for your brain. Here it is. The reason I play that probably for the 300th time over the years is that's what I call the over-the-top stratagem of these companies that funded that fake PR piece to be put out. That, oh, we know it's hurting women and the insert says don't give it to pregnant women. Just take it off the insert and give it to them and just Katie bar the door. You know, if we're going to kill 1 million people with vaccines, why not kill 20 million? Or is it pure hubris? What is behind this from your deep research, Dr. Blaylock?
Well, listening to this piece that you played, that was a very clever way that they came out with this. What they found was that these kids that live on islands who eat whale meat has the highest mercury level of any sea creature. And they found out that if they ate the whale meat and had high mercury levels, but they also had very high omega-3 intake, it blunted the damaging effect of the mercury. So they had a slightly higher IQ than people who were deficient in omega-3, but they were far below the IQ elevation of those who didn't have the mercury. So they just restated this, implying that the mercury was making the kids smarter, and it wasn't the omega-3, but the mercury was interfering with the ability of omega-3 to improve mental function. Now, the fact that mercury is harmful to the brain, there's more research than you could read the titles to the articles that prove it beyond any stretch of the imagination. Minute doses that are almost in the nano concentration, can produce significant brain destruction and damage. It goes on for years. Now, that is so well demonstrated. For them to come out with this, it is an absolute lie. It was a distortion. It was nothing but pure propaganda, and it led to the harm of a lot of people, thinking that mercury actually improves your IQ. That's the most insane, idiotic statement I've ever heard, and it's unsupportable. But that's the kind of nonsense these people are involved in. What they do is they manipulate research. They pay scientists to produce phony research. They even have articles written by a professional company and then have doctors put their name on it later because it's going to be in a prestigious journal. And the doctors didn't have anything to do with the writing of or the research.
That's what the UN did with the 2,000 scientists on climate change.
Well, this is happening all the time. Particularly these pharmaceutical companies. They pay this company to write fake articles. And then they'll go to Harvard or Yale or the big universities and get people to put their name on it to give it prestige.
Exactly, but I'm not a brain surgeon, but I've seen hundreds of articles. Nothing's been studied more than mercury the last 200 years. As you said, it's the most destructive thing in the brain except for cyanide. We have guys type in electron microscope, mercury in brain tissue. It causes electrochemical chain reactions, explosions. It's how do they with straight faces say mercury is good for your child? I don't see mercury on the vitamin aisle.
They say it because they're getting pockets full of money. These people are being paid huge amounts of money to make these absurd, harmful statements. The problem with the scientists that know better than this, the scientists who are doing the real research on mercury brain toxicity, generally are badgered and terrified to speak out publicly because, number one, the media will not interview them. The media will not carry their story. And the only thing the media will do will destroy their reputations, and then the pharmaceutical companies and the government and agencies will do everything they can to get these people to lose their jobs. And this has happened time and time again. A good friend of mine, David Lewis, wrote a book called Science for Sale, which I would recommend anybody that's interested in this subject buy this book. He worked for the EPA for 30-plus years, and he exposed some of the phony things the EPA was doing that was harming people, published it in one of the most prestigious of the science magazines, and they fired him. And he goes through here and shows all the cases of people who've been fired, how they control science, how they control the media, tell these fake propaganda stories to the public so that they can promote vaccine programs, they can promote fluoride, they can promote whatever they want to. And the real scientists are never interviewed. For instance, when they did this big study in the Vera Straiten study, no true mercury expert was even invited to the meeting. Now, there were a number that are world-renowned experts on mercury and the effect on the brain. They weren't consulted. None of their articles were even quoted or entered into the study. But even so, the study found that mercury damaged the brains of these children that were from vaccine. And then they altered the study when they published it in the Journal of Pediatrics, so it said just the opposite. Now, this is the kind of shenanigans that goes on every day, and this is the kind of nonsense that the average physician is reading.
So let me ask you this. Big Pharma just wants to make money, but as we know, Bayer knew they were shipping out the HIV and hepatitis and the factor VIII, did it on purpose, didn't care. That came out in trial. Is it eugenics steering it all, or is it they just don't care? I mean, how do you get executives and then this whole chain of people to get up there and say mercury's good for your kid and to cover up all the bad things that are happening? How did it get so evil? What's going on?
Well, I think the number one driving force for CEOs of companies and head of the Pediatrics Association and all this is money. They're buying these people. They're putting large amounts of money into their pocket. The doctors that are they're experts and top people at Harvard and Yale and Columbia, they are approached and given contracts to do fake research for these pharmaceutical companies, and they can't resist the money. It's just too much. It's too lucrative. Some of these people are making millions of dollars off of it.
And now they've done the fake research, so now they're part of the crew. They're now compromised. They're now defending it because they don't want to be discredited.
Exactly. And so the real physician, the real researcher who's doing this research that's demonstrating this damage, he's told, well, you can publish in your journals, but don't ever approach the media. There's been numerous cases of these people publishing these articles or trying to get them published in journals and having the pharmaceutical company approach the journal and have the article removed. This has happened numerous times. Very good research, carefully done research. But if it shows harm of a pharmaceutical product that's making them billions of dollars, they will use their influence on that journal to have that article removed. Now, some journals are beyond that, won't do that, but there's a lot that will, and a lot of them are the journals that physicians are reading. So the physician reads these articles, he thinks it's in a prestigious journal, and he believes it. He will not do the homework that takes deeper reading, deeper understanding, and find out he's being lied to. So they paw parrot this nonsense to their patients. And it's just like this Gardasil thing. I can't believe that physicians see an 11-year-old girl and 10-year-old girl and tell that mother that child needs to have a Gardasil vaccine or she's going to get cervical cancer. Now, number one, he doesn't know anything about HPV virus if he says that, because it's sheer nonsense, and he doesn't know anything about the vaccine. Now, there's been almost 100 girls have died from that vaccine. There's been thousands that have been harmed. They continue to be harmed. And
the insert says it doesn't even protect you from HPV. I want to shift gears in the time we have left and talk about Obamacare. Now they admit the death panels. They admit VA secret death list. Ezekiel Emanuel admits it's about getting rid of old people. An article he wrote, It's Time to Die by 75, The Case for Killing Granny, 21 new taxes, bankrupting poor people, payroll taxes on poor people, rich companies exempt. I mean, such a monumental screw job, and the Democrats and Republican leadership defend it. I mean, is that not a manifest conviction of the power structure that they would bring in this eugenics-based system?
Yeah, I mean, the Obamacare is just an absolute outrage. It was a fraud from the very beginning. It was sold on fraudulent data. The people who really knew about medical health care, who came forward and said that the numbers you're quoting are false, they're not real. Most of these people that are uninsured are people who have chosen on their own not to do it because they don't want to spend the money. They're young, they're healthy, and they don't see any reason to do it. Well, they inflated the number even further than that to give the public the impression there were all these tens of millions of people that were uncovered, and the government was going to do the benevolent thing and make sure they they were covered. Well, they lied from the very beginning. Oh, you can keep your doctor. Oh, you can go to any hospital you want to. You can keep your plan. They knew that the bill itself said none of that was true. The media covered for them, as always. You can always depend on the media to cover for these
And
people.
then Ezekiel Emanuel admitted on Fox News, we played the clip probably 20 times, I'm not going to play it again. He said, no, this is meant to wreck the old system. We're working with the insurance companies to do it. There'll be a few big ones left at the end, and they'll dole out government-controlled care. They admit they are trying to ruin the system, just like you said 4 years ago on this show, to kick all the old doctors in and bring in a bunch of foreign doctors that aren't even doctors.
Well, most of the people I know in medicine are saying, I can't wait to retire. I want to get out of it. I can't stand all this paperwork and control and regimentation and being forced to hurt my patients. They want out. And young people are not wanting to get in. So the answer is, and this is why the government's not worried about, bring in all these foreign doctors from hundreds of countries around the world who they've been practicing in socialized medicine. So they don't see anything wrong with it. They'll come here and practice in American socialized medicine because the system they operate in is in shambles, so they figure this has to be better until it ends up in shambles.
Yeah, that's like Californians fleeing to come to Austin and then try to take my guns and raise taxes and wreck everything. It's like they wreck one place and then they go to the next place to wreck it, and like a bunch of locusts, they just move to the next target.
Well, I've always said that we need report cards for the public because no one's paying attention that every one of these programs, every one of these socialist systems, every socialist country is in shambles, absolute shambles. And yet there has not been a single success report card of any of these systems, and we keep playing it out as if it's the utopian future. To be a progressive,
absolutely. Stay there, Dr. Blaylock. BlaylockHealthChannel.com. Well, we got some really bad news a few hours ago, and we just confirmed it with his wife. I'm going to talk about this at the start of the next hour. Dr. Stan Monteith, medical doctor, passed away this morning after battling cancer a long time. He is resting in peace with the Lord, and they don't want folks to call. They said if you want to write support or letters to the family, it's Radio Liberty, P.O. Box 969, and I guess that's SOQUEL, California, 95073. And he was just an amazing guy. And I don't think anybody had more total knowledge of what was going on and the medical tyranny and why they were doing it than Dr. Stan Monteith. I mean, he would do 5 hours of radio a day on over 100 stations around the country, including some of our affiliates, and it's a true loss. I don't know how to eulogize him at this point except fight back against the tyranny. I know even he was on about a few months ago while battling cancer, and we went and interviewed him a year ago, and he would have to go lay down for 20 minutes and get up and come talk to us. He was somebody that really cared about freedom. And I was just talking to Dr. Blaylock about why the enemy is so arrogant right now, juxtaposed to somebody like Dr. Stan Monteith. Dr. Blaylock, I know you've been on his show before, but specifically, can you repeat what you were saying to me during the break?
Well, Stan was a good friend of mine. I've been to his house, know his wife and his son. I was very close to Stan. He's a man of enormous virtue, honesty. He just loved this country, and he loved freedom, and he fought for it. He spent all his money on that radio station. He's just the most wonderful man that I've ever met. Just incredible, his whole family. So I'm really saddened by this. But what I was telling you, and Stan he liked when I would say these things, is that, it's said that a man is a socialist in direct proportion to his contempt for his fellow man. And that's what we see. These socialists, these central planners, the collectivists, have absolute arrogance. They see themselves as elites, that they should dominate and rule and design the world, and that people are nothing but useless, indolent, stupid cattle to be moved around like a chess piece. And people, unfortunately, too many, are allowing themselves to be treated this way. You live in a free country. You have an opportunity to save yourself, but people need to wake up. They need to read about socialism, communism, collectivism. They need to understand the words, the propaganda, how this works, and quit listening to the idiotic propaganda from the elitists themselves, because they're the ones who hammer this nonsense that, well, there's no one world conspiracy, there's no design for a world government, when they write about it ceaselessly. You can find it everywhere.
They've literally written thousands of books admitting their whole plan, but knowing the public isn't reading it and just hoping they call us liars and people won't believe us.
That's right. And they have the media. They're yap dogs to sit there and tell everybody, oh, yeah, it's just what David Rockefeller said. It's exactly what Brzezinski said. I tell people, look at two things. Brzezinski and Rockefeller and Kissinger right now, just recently, said we need to get behind this president. He's the best president that we could have. Brzezinski was the one who promoted choosing Obama for the presidency. Now, Brzezinski's not a stupid man. He's a very powerful man. He created the Trilateral Commission. He writes books, numerous books about geopolitical design.
Dr. Blaylock, the next hour is coming up. Do 5 more minutes with us, and I know you got to go, to finish up talking about the master plan and a little bit more about your good friend, Dr. Stan Monteith.
Now you can watch the InfoWars Nightly News streaming live as it happens for free.
Check it out at Infowars.com/show.